First interim joint committee meeting on appropriations and revenue, Wednesday, June the 2nd, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, Annex Room 149. First off, anyone in attendance personally or attending remotely, make sure that your cell phones are turned off, silenced, or otherwise rendered moot for the purposes of this meeting. If you are on remote attendance, please make sure that you have the service on mute unless you're attempting to speak. If you have a question, you're a committee member, hit the chat or text one of us as usual. We will try to recognize you as quickly as we can. When we call roll call, make sure that members indicate whether they are attending from the annex remotely or from another location remotely. And then one introduction, if I may, we have Grant Minix. And would Grant stand up, please? Great. He's joined our A&R committee staff. He began working with the committee on May the 17th. He's a graduate fellow, attends Eastern Kentucky University, and working on Master of Public Administration program. Welcome. Thank you very much. And then please call the roll.
Senator Buford.
Here. Remote.
Thank you. Senator Carroll.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Senator Caslin. No response. Senator Givens. No response. Senator Kerr. No response. Senator McGarvey. No response. Senator Meredith.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Senator Nemes.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Senator Webb. No response. Senator West.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Beckler.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Bentley.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Blanton.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Bridges.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Dossett.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Fisher.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Fleming.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Flood.
District 75.
Thank you. Representative Fugit.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Gentry.
Present in my annex office.
Thank you. Representative Goforth.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Representative Hale. No response. Representative Hart. No response. Representative Hatton. No response. Representative Nemes.
Here in the room.
Thank you. Representative Palumbo. No response. Representative Prunty.
Here in the room.
Thank you. Representative Raymond.
I'm here from home.
Thank you. Representative Reed.
Here in the room.
Thank you. Representative Riley. No response. Representative Santoro.
Present in District 60 at my house.
Thank you. Representative Tipton.
In the room.
Thank you. Representative Wilner.
Present here in the 35th House District.
Thank you. Co-Chair McDaniel.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Chairman Petrie.
Present in the room. We have a quorum, and I'm going to skip on the agenda just for a moment, go down to numbers 5 and 6 for the members. Correspondence from Jenny Bannister and list of reports received. Just want to note that those lists and correspondence are in our committee packets, and if you have any questions, please direct them to staff or myself. Otherwise, we have received that correspondence and reports that lists things received from the executive branch. That'll take care of 5 and 6. Let's get back up to number 2, and that is status update on Kentucky Michelle P. and supports for community living, SCL, Medicaid waiver programs. This issue was on for budget review subcommittee meeting with Chair Bentley earlier this morning, and Lisa Lee, Commissioner, and Pam Smith, Director, were on the agenda. We kind of run close on time. Amy stayed, spoke for a few moments, and I had offered to let her go ahead and pick up where she left off, understanding that some members of this committee heard the conversation, some members did not, so make sure you put it in context. Please approach the desk, introduce yourself for the record, and I'll swear you under oath.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Amy Stade. I am the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of Private Providers.
Raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to pull up my presentation. This is from this morning, so please forgive the inaccurate title. Again, my name is Amy Stade. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Association of Private Providers. CAP is a trade association representing 1915C waiver providers who provide services to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have over 100 private provider members. Is that better? Okay, thank you. We have over 100 members who provide services to people with IDD. Combined, our members support over 10,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, generally through the supports for community living and Michelle P. waiver, but some individuals with disabilities do receive services through the home and community-based waiver. Just a little background information and context for everyone. We do have 5 1915C waivers. They are the ABI, the Home and Community Base, the Model 2, the Michelle P. waiver, and the SCL. The Michelle P. waiver and the SCL are specifically for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who would be admitted to an institutional setting or a nursing facility if these waiver services were not available. Oh, goodness.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to butt in a few times.
Yeah.
Just at the 10,000-foot level,
Yep.
if not on a waiver and someone needing services is in a nursing facility or otherwise institutionalized, is that at a greater or lesser cost than what would be to the state through the waiver programs?
It is a significant cost, and actually my slides aren't working, so I'll just kind of run through this. If you compare, if you compare this, for example, the supports for community living waiver, which is a residential waiver, that costs on average $215 per day to provide that care, and ICF is about $1,275 per day.
Is there any significant difference in level of services provided, whether it's through an institution or through a private provider?
No, and actually our private providers are community-based settings. The individuals are fully integrated into the community, but the level of care that they receive is the same. And just for context, the Michelle P. waiver, which is a non-residential waiver, costs about $33,530 per year per person. Still significantly less than that $1,200 a day that we receive in institutional settings. We do have significant wait lists. I'm sure the Department for Medicaid Services and the Division of Community Alternatives will speak to that. They have the most up-to-date information. But multi-year waits are common, and I'm sure you've all heard about it. Today, I'm here to talk about the impact that COVID-19 has had on our 1915C waiver providers.
Just to make sure everyone's clear, do we have a small, medium, or large wait list to provide these services at this point, pre-COVID and during COVID?
Large.
Okay. Numbers, do you have those or not? Just asking.
I do. They're a little bit out of date that I learned in our last presentation, but they're about right. So our Michelle P. waiver, it's 7,492, and I think it's actually a little bit less than that because they allocated slots this week. And for our SCL, it is 2,980, with 121 of those being urgent, meaning that they need a place to live pretty soon, and 2,765 for future planning. And just there, I have some average times to wait to be on the wait list. For Michelle P. waiver, it's about 2.9 years, and for SCL, it is 3.64 years for urgent and 7.16 years for future planning.
Okay, and with those people on the wait list, we say quote unquote wait list. Does that mean if a slot is available, they are eligible and ready to be placed, or are they in a holding list, or please explain?
Yes. So for the supports for community living waiver, that wait list is almost triaged. So when you become eligible, you get an evaluation, and they kind of evaluate Do you need a slot urgently? Can you wait a few years? Are you just planning for the future, etc.? So our most critical needs are at the top, and anyone on the Supports for Community Living waitlist can apply for an emergency slot, meaning that would they become homeless tomorrow? Are they suddenly, has a parent caregiver died? Do they suddenly need a place to live? You can apply for an urgent slot at any point, and that automatically, if accepted into an urgent placement, bumps you to the top of the list before anyone else. The Michelle P. Waiver waitlist, there has been discussion of some people being on the wait list that aren't necessarily eligible for the services. It's my understanding that the Department for Medicaid Services and the Division of Community Alternatives in the past 5 years have worked hard to go back through that wait list and to ensure that everyone who is on the wait list actually qualifies for services. And it's my understanding that a tremendous amount of people have been moved off the wait list because they aren't actually eligible. They would have those numbers. I'm not sure what those are. But unfortunately, the Michelle P. Waiver wait list is first come, first served. So there's no flexibility for emergency circumstances in that waiver.
Understood. Thank you. And just setting up context.
Again, I'm here to talk about the impact that COVID-19 has had on our 1915C waiver providers. So my association, the Kentucky Association of Private Providers, did a survey of all of our members in May 2021. It revealed two things. Number one, that providers have been significantly impacted in revenue, and providers have been significantly impacted in workforce. Now, when we talk about revenue, let's keep in mind here, these providers are 100% Medicaid reimbursed. They get no money from other payers. So when we talk about revenue and workforce, we can't just increase wages. We can't just find other sources. It's Kentucky Medicaid that's footing the bill. 91% of respondents reported that they'd experienced significantly lost revenue as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The average lost revenue of those who reported they lost revenue was $682,624. So for providers who are not billing in the tens of million dollars per year, that's significant. These providers, generally speaking, they operate off paper-thin margins. So that's a massive hit for someone to suddenly lose $682,000 in 1 year. Sorry. Now on to workforce. 54.7% of respondents reported that the greatest challenge they currently face is recruiting and retaining staff. That we call them our direct support professional staff. They're a caregiving staff. 86% of respondents report that they'd experienced difficulty recruiting and retaining staff despite offering enhanced wages, overtime, bonuses, sign-on bonuses, basically anything that they can think of. So of those people who report, of that 86%, 77% are residential providers. Now, let me tell you why this is significant. Our residential providers have been providing 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week care since the beginning of the pandemic. This is shift work, and they are legally required to staff all shifts. These are individuals who generally need 24-hour supervision, so they have to find staff for every single shift. Only 2.8% of respondents reported that they are fully staffed. 50% are critically understaffed, and the other 48% are understaffed but managing at the moment. 72% of those who have had staffing issues experienced increased overtime. In their last pay period, respondents reported that they had an increase of $22,000 in overtime costs directly related to overtime for staffing issues. That's just in one pay period. Kentucky waiver providers have struggled for a long time recruiting and retaining staff. Again, our wages are tied to our reimbursement rate. And the Navigant study, which took place in 2018, revealed that providers could only pay about $10 an hour. It varies somewhat by service, but it's around there for all services. I'll tell you that since the pandemic has begun, that has actually gone down. because providers are experiencing such significantly increased overtime costs, they've actually had to hire on new employees at a lower starting rate, understanding that those employees are going to get guaranteed and significant amounts of overtime. So they're having to start out at lower rates just to make up for the significantly increased overtime. We've got a really high direct support professional turnover rate. In 2019, it was 47%. Just to give you some context, nationally, turnover for all industries is about 3.7%. So I don't have any 2020 data on that, but I would venture to say that it's gone up from 47%. So why do we have this turnover? It's the low wages, and it's the emotionally and physically demanding nature of the work. These are not, the work required is not commensurate with a minimum wage job. This has a significant impact on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Recent research from the Council on Quality and Leadership has indicated that high DSP turnover negatively impacts the health, safety, and welfare of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and significantly hinders their quality of life. DSP turnover results in increased critical incidents, ER visits, and hospitalizations, which are costly, we know. Research also shows that DSP continuity reduces instances of abuse and neglect. DSP workforce affects an individual's ability to access waiver services. If there's no workforce, there's no services. So what we're seeing is individuals who, for example, are choosing the consumer-driven option where they hire and fire their own staff can't find qualified staff because they can't afford to pay them what that staff needs to come do the work. It's also had a significant impact on providers. Obviously, the pandemic has had an effect on all businesses, but as the survey data we discussed a minute ago talks about, or suggests rather, is that waiver providers have been uniquely impacted. So what's happened is we're operating at critically low staffing levels with significantly increased overtime costs and reduced revenue. It's a recipe for disaster. There's also significant costs associated with frequently onboarding new employees, all of this is done while providing 24-hour care. So right now, we've got providers who are constantly hiring every single week, scheduling interviews, trying to hire, trying to get people on staff. And in order to hire a new employee in these services, you have to do a background check, you have to do a drug screen, and you have to train them. All of those things cost money. And what we're seeing is that once people they'll come for the interview, they'll get hired on, they'll come to the training, and day 1 or maybe even day 10, they'll quit because they just say, this job, the stress of this job is not worth what they're paying me. Meanwhile, that provider's invested a tremendous amount of money into trying to onboard that staff. And they don't get reimbursed for those costs either. Also, this has an impact on wait lists. Providers have reported that they're currently turning down referrals despite having capacity because they don't have the workforce. So they have homes with empty rooms where individuals could be safely living and not in an institution, but they're turning down those referrals because they don't have the staff to provide the care. We're never going to be able to meaningfully address our waitlist issues if we do not address this staffing crisis. Workforce is a critical part of our HCBS infrastructure. If you think about HCBS as a bridge, workforce are the pillars that support the bridge. As I said earlier, institutional care is costly and is inappropriate for individuals who have been in the community. But if a provider goes out of business and there is no residential setting for them to move into, they may have to be reinstitutionalized. And again, the most prominent contributor to our HCBS workforce crisis is wages. So, again, just some policy considerations to keep in mind. These are 100% Medicaid funded services. It is impossible for providers to raise wages without a corresponding rate increase. Kentucky's waiver reimbursement rates have never been adjusted for inflation or economic growth. And as a result, these DSP wages lag behind nearly all other sectors, including the fast food industry. We've seen Walmart, McDonald's, Starbucks hiring at $15 to $20 an hour, and it is impossible for these waiver providers to compete with those wages. Additionally, we're hearing from the federal government that it's likely that the minimum wage is going to increase, maybe to $15 an hour. We have to think about that too when we think about these waiver services, because these providers will not be able to afford those kinds of wages under the current rates. So what are solutions? We have two. Number one, we have one-time funds coming to the state of Kentucky from the American Rescue Plan Act. Specifically, it's in the form of a federal match, specifically for HCBS services. We think that it'll be about $96 million. Again, because it's a federal match, it's based on spending. But if spending holds steady, it's probably going to be around that much money. We would like the Department for Medicaid Services to utilize those funds to help providers recruit and retain DSPs and to help providers recover from COVID-related revenue losses. Things like special salaries, fixed expenses, like has been proposed with childcare facilities. Eventually, though, one-time money is not going to solve this workforce crisis. It's going to help in the short term, but we need a long-term fix. And we need to implement long-term funding strategies in the next budget designed to address our HCBS workforce crisis, especially in light of the looming $15 minimum wage. We have budget language that we would be happy to work with you on that addresses that. We can specifically identify specific services that would need the rate increase. It wouldn't necessarily need to be an across-the-board unilateral rate increase. And also, we would require that providers pass along 75% of any rate increase onto employees. That additional 25% would be reserved so providers can pay the increased payroll taxes that happen as a result of increasing wages, and also deal with wage compression issues, increased management staff wages, things like that. Also, providers would be willing to go through an audit, so you all can ensure that your money's being used wisely, So if they don't use 75% to pay staff, they have to pay it back. That's all I have. That was a lot, I know. Does anyone have any questions?
First off, I'd like to ask, have you queried other states to see if they're in similar situations as far as labor shortage, and how are they attempting to address the situation?
Some are and some aren't. The ones that are, their states have agreed to use the funds to address workforce, but I'll tell you, many states have inflation and wage components built into their reimbursement rate. So the rate's almost bifurcated. So as the cost of living increases, the wage component of the rate increases. So the wages generally keep up, if that makes sense. A lot of states do that.
Thank you. And Representative Tipton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate this presentation. This is an issue that we hear a lot about from constituents who have family members who are on long waiting lists. I want to dig down a little bit on your comment about the Medicaid reimbursement. Has that rate been steady? Have there been a history of increases? Could you give us a little background on how that Medicaid reimbursement is determined? And the Medicaid reimbursement is obviously for the people in the homes. Are the people in the institutions also on Medicaid? So could you just give us a little context of where those funds are coming from and how those rates have adjusted over time and how those rates are determined?
Sure. So just for some context, any individual who receives services in the Michelle P. or SEL waiver, it's likely that they also receive their health care from the Medicaid program and are probably enrolled in an MCO. These waiver services are non-health services. We've gotten waivers from them from the federal government, and they are state plan. They're not MCO funded, et cetera. They kind of come from a separate pool of money. And Commissioner Lee is on this call, and she can correct me later if I misspeak about this. But so what's interesting about these waiver services, years ago, and I believe it was circa 2010 to 2012, we made a transition of SCL1 waiver to SCL2 waiver. We're currently in SCL2. And actually, the rates decreased. And and I wasn't in my position then, so I'm speaking from what others have told me. But apparently the rates under SCL1 were actually higher than what people are paid now to provide these services. It's my understanding, again, my advocacy only covers the Michelle P. waiver and the SCL, but it's my understanding that all of the waivers have not received a rate increase. The Supports for Community Living waiver did receive a rate increase in the 2016 or 17 budget, somewhere around there. It was a 10% rate increase. And they were able to argue the Supports for Community Living waiver is the only waiver that pays a provider tax. It's 5.5% of revenue. And that provider tax was implemented in order to fund rate increases. They'd been paying that tax for 14 years and finally were like, hey, we've been paying this tax for 14 years. Can we get that rate increase? And so that was implemented. And again, I think that those rates are still below what they were paid originally back in SCL1.
Senator Meredith?
Thank you, Chairman Petrie. I'd like to kind of follow up on your original question about the reimbursement for these respective services. And I was maybe reading your mind a little bit, but I'm thinking probably your thought was if we could place people in nursing homes, currently in nursing homes in the waiver program, then the cost difference would probably fund a lot of those slots. I'm just not sure how many. I think it certainly is an option we need to explore and look at. I'm just not sure how significant it is. You know, is it a fair statement to say that probably the needs of waiver patients could be met in long-term care facilities, but not all the patients in nursing homes, long-term care facilities, needs could be met by the waiver program? Is that fair?
Yes. So to answer your question, when we're talking about specifically institutional settings, we have institutional settings that are IDD specific. All of those individuals may be appropriate to transition out. But I'll tell you, you could allocate 10,000 slots tomorrow and we wouldn't have the workforce to actually care, to provide the care for those slots.
It's a double-edged sword, and I appreciate that. But Chairman Petrie, I think your line of questioning there is something worth pursuing a little bit further. I think there is potential to have a more appropriate allocation of care than what we've seen in the past. But again, because of the lack of slots, we don't know. But maybe that's something we can challenge the cabinet to give us some information on. But
yes,
thank you.
Thank you. And real quickly, Ms. Stade, can you supply Ms. Hayes with corrected slides, and then we will try to get those disseminated to members, please?
I emailed them out. They're emailed. They've been emailed to staff.
Great. We will find them and make sure they get disseminated. Thank you very much. Representative Prunty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you asked this question in Budget Review Subcommittee. How much is the workforce issue related to unemployment insurance, extra payments from unemployment insurance? Are people not coming back to work because of that?
So it definitely is related. Like I said, we've had workforce problems for a while, but since the COVID-19 pandemic, they have gotten significantly worse. And it's a two-pronged problem. One, as you alluded to, the extra unemployment has certainly, I've heard from my members, has kept a lot of people from coming back to work. Two is that if they were considering coming back to work, now providers can't afford to pay as much as all of the other businesses who are having trouble recruiting employees, because our businesses just can't raise rates. There's no one to pass along that cost to. There's no customer. The customer is Kentucky Medicaid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Goforth, and then I'm going to turn back over to Commissioner Lee and Director Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious. My little brother was actually in one of these programs. Little quick story. He was going to a day center. That day center offered some of these housing opportunities. They talked him into coming to spend the night. This was before I became his guardian. That's why I'm his guardian now. And then he stayed, and I had no control over that, and they talked him into staying in this program. They also kept his monthly check, his SSI and Social Security, on top of whatever their reimbursement was. That's about $700 and some a month. How is that calculated into the reimbursement and what these employees are getting, or what the owners of these companies are getting, or anything else? I'm just wondering, is that taken into consideration, or is that normal? Because I was unsure that that's a process. I ended up having to take deputies to go pick him up from one of these houses and filing for custody of him, so and guardianship to make sure that it didn't happen again. But these people were clearly in it for profit reasons, and I'm just wondering, how's that calculated in?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience. Waiver providers, generally speaking, if they're a residential provider, either they lease the houses from any sort of property management company for these individuals to live in, or they own them themselves. Individuals who receive SSI are required by the federal government to pay their fair share of room and board, and waiver providers are allowed by statute and regulation to charge room and board. They have to demonstrate that room and board includes utilities and food as well. So those rates generally are slightly higher than market rent rates because we've got the food and the utility built into that. These things are heavily monitored by state guardianship and by all of the oversight agencies to ensure that these providers are charging fair rates. But I will tell you that the room and board truly just does cover the room and board. Our residential reimbursement is, I don't have it in front of me, but it's about $300 a day for 24-hour care. So yes, that room and board does help supplement, but these providers are still not getting rich off these services, and they still cannot afford to raise the wages of their staff to provide so that they can recruit and retain qualified staff. But all these providers want to do is be able to pay staff more, and they can't.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee, Director Smith.
I'm Lisa Lee. I'm the Commissioner for the Department for Medicaid Services. Pam Smith is with me. And before we jump into the
yes, if the two of you will raise your hands, please. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ms. Smith? Oh, mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, that silly mute button. I do.
Thank you very much. Please proceed. And understand we had, this is a continuation of a meeting this morning, and you've heard what's been spoken of so far. So if you will fill in as needed and appropriate, please.
Thank you. I think as we've heard today, this population that we are taking care of in the waivers, definitely a very vulnerable population that can be taken advantage of without, if they don't have the appropriate individuals looking out for them and taking care of them. So we definitely take our waiver programs very seriously. The individuals that we serve do need additional care. And I'd like to point out that in the state's testimony, she did say that these programs are 100% financed by Medicaid, and that is true. All the waiver services that allow individuals to remain in their home are 100% financed by Medicaid because there's no other program to do this. There's no other program, no insurance carrier that will provide the services that individuals need to remain in their home, such as personal supports and those sorts of things. Now, individuals in the waiver programs have that those waiver supports, and then they have state plan services, which consist of medical services. So I think it's really important for us to look at individuals who are in our waiver programs, make sure that if they do have other private insurance, that their medical needs are being met by their other insurance carriers. Rather than putting a lot of that up on Medicaid. And I do think that we need to be fiscally responsible in our programs. As Ms. State said, we do have an enhanced HCBS funding that we are allowed to access. We have to get a plan to CMS within 30 days. That plan was due, I think, around June the 13th. But we did request and received approval from CMS to extend our submission date another 30 days because we want to develop a very well thought out plan on how we want to spend that money. We have been engaging with providers. We've even polled their members to try to determine how to best use those funds. Again, we can use those funds to expand, enhance, or strengthen our HCBS programs. We can't really or will not implement anything that's going to need ongoing funding. Again, this is a one-time opportunity for us to strengthen our waivers. Again, as you know, the previous administration embarked on a waiver redesign. We want to really look at the product, the document that was developed during that redesign. This administration started to continue that redesign, and we had pushback from providers. We had some concern because in order for us to go forward with that redesign, we would had to have for it to be budget neutral, we would have had to take them from one provider group to another. And as you've heard already, the provider rates are low and could be potentially impacting provider recruitment and retention of employees. So if we had shifted those funds, it wouldn't have been fair to one provider type. So we put a pause on the program because we didn't want any unintended consequences from a redesign. We have determined we'd need approximately $43 million additional dollars each year to go forth with that redesign. And with the HCB enhanced funding, again, we're going to need appropriations from the state to meet our state match on the funding for the HCBS program for those enhanced funds from CMS for those one-time funds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pam. And again, she has delivered this presentation once, so we'll go through that very quickly and then answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am Pam Smith, the Director of the Division of Community Alternatives, and we provide oversight for all of our 1915C HCBS waivers. I want to provide just a little information on wait list, and I included information about all of our waivers. One, I want to highlight that we've worked very hard to eliminate the wait list in both ABI waivers. We're seeing unprecedented growth in HCB. Model 2 has remained steady. And then our two waivers that still have the wait list are Michelle P. and SCL. These numbers are as of the end of April, which is when we began pulling information. So at that point, Michelle P., there were 7,441 individuals on that wait list. I'll go into a little bit more detail about those individuals in just a second. For SCL, there's a total of 2,886 individuals, but 2,765 of those are on future planning. And it's important to note that sometimes those are even children that a family knows that at some point in time in their life, they may need to receive those services. So they're placed on that list specifically for future planning. The individuals on the urgent list typically need services within a year or sooner, but at any point in time, any individual on either the urgent or the future planning list can apply for emergency status and can be granted a slot. For Michelle P., just to note, we are in the process of allocating 175 additional slots. Hopefully we'll have those out by the end of this week. Just some information on the waiting list when we look at how it's comprised. So the average age of an individual on Michelle P. waiting list is 16. 73%, so over 5,400 are actually younger than 21. 15% of the individuals that are on the wait list are accessing services in another waiver. The majority of those are HCB, although we do have a few that are on SCL, but they do not wish to give up their spot on the Michelle P. waiting list. So we allow them that option because it's their freedom to choose which waiver they wish to receive services in. The average time that an individual is on the wait list is 3 years. However, the oldest or the longest someone's been on has been 6 years. We add an average of 78 individuals a month to the Michelle P. wait list. So far, since the beginning of 2021, we've allocated 350 individuals. As I mentioned, we're about to allocate another 175. For about the last 18 months, we've been allocating every 90 days. And the reason we wait 90 days is it takes a period of time for someone to get their allocation, to reach out and get an assessment, and then to get a plan of care developed and to receive services. So that slot actually is not considered taken until that individual receives their first service. For SCL, the average age of individual on the SCL wait list, and this is combined between the urgent and the future planning. 90% are accessing services in another waiver. A large percentage of those are receiving Michelle P. services, while there are some that also have medical or physical disabilities and are being served on the HCV waiver.
Let me step in just for a moment. Senator Carroll, you have a question?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to interrupt. Pam, we were on the waiting list, and Amy thought that we had weeded that list out some. I remember a few years ago we started a process whereby the cabinet was trying to go through and kind of assess those on the Michelle P. list to see who would actually qualify. Are we taking any steps now to preclude them being on the list for 3-5 years? Yes. Are all of those folks going to actually qualify?
So, as you know, that endeavor got stopped shortly after it was started. There were regulatory reasons that stopped that process. But beginning in 2016, the individuals had to apply through MWMA, and we have a much stricter, there's a validation process that they actually do have an intellectual or developmental disability. We look at the documentation that they submit. So it is very unlikely that anybody from that point forward that got added to the wait list would not meet level of care. Prior to that, the way the original reg was written, all an individual had to do was submit a MAP form to say they wanted to be on the waiver, and they were added to the waiver. We've just about made it through all of those allocations. We're almost up to 2016.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm gonna ask a question really quickly, and this is gonna be a hard question for each of the three of you to answer. All right, it's made to not be answerable, but to find out what your estimate is. Okay, we clear? Good.
Yep.
All right. So if you were making a recommendation to the committee right now of how many slots, additional slots, ought to be funded and made available, what would that be?
I think it would depend on the specific waiver.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you name the waiver and give me the number.
Michelle P. maybe, and again, just guess, wild guess, 25,000.
Okay, SCLs?
Pam, I'll leave that one to you.
I think SCL, to not have for each individual to be receiving services that wanted services and that would qualify at this point in time, I think that really 2,500 to 3,000, because that would also allow us to transition some other individuals out of a nursing facility. I think SCL, you're always going to have a wait list because there's always those individuals that don't qualify right now, but they will in the future. But it's because they have natural supports and they recognize they don't need the services, and they're not requesting the services right now. They just want to be there so that, in the future that they have access to them.
Understood. Now, within the context of this was a wild guess or just a guess, and that's understood. Those are large numbers, and I don't know that the budget would permit funding all of that, nor when you consider all of the items that demand attention, that's going to be possible. But I think there's another problem, which is what I kind of want to get back to. If there were 1,000 or 2,000, pick a number, 100, 200 slots made available, what kind of workforce do we have in order to even, as a practical matter, address and facilitate the use of those slots? Would the industry be able to come up with 100 slots within 30 days that they could administer effectively, or would it take time, or what are we looking at? Because you've mentioned work shortage and pay, so if you'll respond to that, please.
Yes, so there is absolutely a workforce shortage. Now, with participant-directed services, we're seeing more and more access of that, where we've had individuals, especially during the pandemic, where it has worked well for them. It's not as difficult to find the employees on the participant-directed waiver services side. But we do recognize that right now, if there was a large infusion of individuals, total we have 505 enrolled waiver providers to serve over 20,000 people. So we can't deny that there is an issue, which is why I believe we are moving very thoughtfully and consider planning is going into what we do or what our recommendations are going to be for the waiver and for that enhanced funding and what we do going forward.
And I sincerely appreciate that planning. It's a tough situation. Ms. Stade?
Yes. So just knowing historically what we've done in budgets, understanding that there are constraints, I would say that you could fund 250 SCL, 500 Michelle P, but with the caveat that in a 2-year budget, you can't fund them you can't release those slots till the first year. What you have to do, in my opinion, is invest in the workforce through rate increases with, a reporting mechanism attached to it. Build up the workforce in year 1. Release the slots in year 2. And obviously, you could even release the slots halfway through year 1, but you've got to build up the workforce first, especially when we're talking about residential providers.
Now, I'm just asking an open question. When you say build up the workforce in that first year, are you talking about general fund money going into that? Or are you talking about FMAP? Are you talking about match increases, the one-time money? What are you talking about?
So there are 2 approaches. With the one-time funds and the federal match, there is a provision in there where CMS has laid out that you can increase rates. Obviously, we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we increase rates and then can't fund it permanently, because this is a permanent workforce issue that the only solution to paying people more is to increase the rates. So you can do it 2 ways. One, you can use the temporary funds to issue, call them rescue payments, kind of based on historic utilization, and let providers use that for workforce. If there's no messaging about a rate increase in the future to help, providers are probably going to do things like sign-on bonuses, you finished the work week bonuses, things like that aren't permanent wage increases. Because again, we can't increase employee wages on a temporary basis. Another option is to you can increase rates with the temporary ARPA funding, but that would require then a follow-up commitment from the General Assembly saying, we're going to use the federal funds to increase these rates temporarily, but we promise you, and we're going to set aside this money to fund the rate increase moving forward.
So for every 100 slots that come available, how many workers would have to be brought on board?
It depends. There are different staffing ratios for different services. If we're talking about a residential service, it's 3 to 1 staff. Three participants, 1 staff.
Okay. Senator Carroll?
Yeah, just quickly, and I think this is one of these issues from a provider perspective that it has to be approached at both ends. The rate increase obviously helps, but prior to pandemic and the response to the pandemic, which has created the workforce issue, one of the biggest struggles for day programs was there were not new people coming in, simply because people could not get waiver slots. Therefore, it was difficult to maintain the numbers of participants in the programs. And now we're to the point that that's probably a good thing, because in our situation, we're having to rebuild our programs. We let people go through attrition, and now we can't get people in as our participants start to come back. And we run a pretty large facility, but that was a struggle pre-pandemic and where we are now. So if we approach it on both ends, where if we could get the reimbursement rates up a little higher, where we could pay better, and then get more slots filled, so we have kids coming out of high school that need these services, just can't get them now. I can't tell you the families that I'm aware of that they just don't have anything, and they know if they apply for Michelle P, they're going to be on the list for years, so it doesn't benefit them at all.
Senator Meredith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just briefly, I can't argue with you that you need additional funding, you need higher rates of pay, but we passed Senate Bill 61 this last session, dealt with Alzheimer's patients and training for caregivers. In the same situation in that environment, the turnover was just atrocious, like 92%. And one of the things we identified was the lack of adequate training. Now, I know everybody gets training, but sometimes you can't say all training programs are alike. So should that be an area of focus? And secondly, one of the things we put in the bill was hopefully to build a career path for people so they could enter the healthcare arena and hopefully become an LPN, an RN, and so forth. So is that another strategy that you could adopt hand in hand with this to bring people into the profession and keep them? Because I'm assuming you're always going to have turnover above the national average. That's just the nature of this beast. But if we could moderate it to some degree, that would be helpful. So again, training and career ladder may help address this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I respond?
Briefly, yes.
Okay. Yes. So at least for direct support professionals, the training's all handled by the College of Direct Supports, which is kind of, I think, Medicaid contracts with them to provide that training. So it's not necessarily provider-based. So there may be ways to strengthen that. And two, I would love to talk to anyone who would listen about maybe community college credits for working while doing this, et cetera. I think that could be a great way to attract people to the field.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, the real world requirements of time are going to make us go on to the next topic. Commissioner Lee, Director Smith, Amy Stade, thank you all very much for presenting this morning as well as this afternoon. And I have a feeling that we're going to continue with this one. And one last comment on the subject matter. I'm very much interested in following what the plan for the ARPA funds going to CMS, that plan that's going to be within the next 30 to 60 days, how that's being developed. I have a personal inclination to look for further development of existing services rather than expanding services past what already exists in the form of current programs. So if you'll keep us updated would be great. Thank you all again. And the next topic up we have, I think, is Budget Director Hicks and Deputy Executive Director of KIA, Sandy Williams, who both also presented this morning in a subcommittee meeting with Chairman Blanton. And so we will assume that some of that has been covered. Everyone in the members, as well as anyone watching today, I understand that these meetings, the subcommittee meetings as well as this meeting, are on YouTube. And as I understand, the subcommittee meetings from this morning are already on YouTube. So you can go back and watch those things if someone refers to something that happened this morning. Director Hicks, Ms. Williams, if y'all will raise your right hands, please. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please proceed. Make sure your microphones are on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the invitation to come here to speak about a brand new project. In the last session, the General Assembly appropriated $300 million from the American Rescue Plan Act's State Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is about $2.2 billion Kentucky is going to receive, devoted to broadband deployment infrastructure development, to be focused on unserved and underserved areas of Kentucky. $250 million of the 300 is for unserved and underserved areas. $50 million is for economic development and commercial industry customers. Of the $250 million, you all permitted $50 million of it to be awarded between now and next April 2022. So right now what we're doing is developing a brand new program for that $50 million. In the 2020 session, you passed legislation that created the Broadband Deployment Fund to be administered through the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority. The governor, with the water and wastewater program, as well as the broadband program, had asked several members of his administration to help the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority to stand up these programs. And so that's why I'm participating in some fashion, because I'm assisting my longtime colleague Sandy Williams and their excellent staff in this brand new program, and reflecting both the importance of the appropriations you've made and their purposes, and the need for heads and hands to get this thing going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in the development of the program. When you passed the statute in 2020, the purpose of the fund was to assist governmental agencies and the private sector entities to construct infrastructure for the deployment of broadband service to underserved and unserved areas of the Commonwealth. So the idea here is infrastructure, right? It's develop the capacity to bring internet to people who don't have it or whose internet is too slow. Next, thank you. And so now in the statutes, we've got a nice set of processes that you all developed in the 20 session and slightly modified in the most recent 2021 session. So I won't go through all of that in detail, but you define terms. You determine the process of application, the information the application would require about the potential providers and applicants. You required 50% match at a minimum from the providers for an eligible project. You assured that we're not going to be redundant of areas that have already received federal dollars to expand internet broadband. You assured that we were not going to provide projects to service areas that already received a sufficient level of broadband deployment. And lastly, in this past session, you modified it and allowed other federal funds to be used to match the state appropriated federal dollars. And one reason for that is there is in the American Rescue Plan Act, there's a local fiscal recovery fund for which there are funds getting ready to be distributed to counties, metropolitan cities, and other cities in Kentucky. So that was an opportunity that you all recognized and incorporated into that. Now, this is a federal program. Next, and so the guidance came out for the state fiscal recovery fund, the local fiscal recovery fund on May 10. The U.S. Department of Treasury is the responsible administering agency. They were the same agency that administered the Coronavirus Relief Fund from the CARES Act. As you all may remember, we had guidance, and then we had guidance, and then we had more guidance, and it changed. I don't expect much of that to happen this time. So we got an initial guidance. There's a 60-day comment period at the federal level. It's like an administrative regulation to them. And then they will issue a final rule. We really don't expect a lot of those rules to change as it relates to the water, wastewater, or the broadband fund, but that's just a prediction of mine. It focuses in the same way your statute does on unserved and underserved areas. One of the things it does a little bit differently is it says if the federal funds going into these projects must provide internet service to households and businesses at a speed of at least 100 megabits per second download and 100 megabits per second upload. Well, that's pretty different it's slightly different from the definitions we have in our state statute. The upload speed is higher. And so they want the symmetry there. They allow some exceptions for excessive cost and geography and topography, but they still have to be scalable on the upload to 100 meg. So a few differences from our existing statute, but in the main, fairly close. Next. So we're developing a process, right? The statute is fairly specific on what needs to be done and how we're to do it, but there are a lot of details. This is brand new. It's a greenfield project. We've never done this before. And so the Infrastructure Authority, very adept at water and wastewater revolving loan fund programs. We're working together closely to develop a process that Kentucky to follow. And what we've done is we've studied other states who have done this, at least a quarter of the country. We've looked at the federal government and how they've done it. We're looking at all their documents, their applications, their frequently asked questions, their evaluation criteria, everything we can look at to learn from them. We've had interviews with several states of some of our members of our core team to get some lessons learned, some wisdom from that. One thing that's not on this slide, and I want to announce that prior to releasing a request for proposal, we're going to release a request for information initially, and that's going to be done very soon. Its purpose is to ask the providers and the municipalities and other government agencies for their ideas, their comments, their suggestions. We don't know what we don't know, and so we want to avail ourselves of their expertise before we finalize our process, and so we're going to do that very soon. And then not too long after that, we're going to release our first effort. We're going to have a two-stage process. We're going to release the RFP for a notice of intent to apply and an initial map of unserved areas. And I say initial because that map will be modified by information we receive from the potential providers and existing providers. And we will finalize that map. Right now, we've got data from the federal FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, on broadband service by speed by census block. And that is and in that information, it can be interpreted that a single household who receives a certain speed makes that census block served. Well, we know that's not true, and so we're not going to align to that, but we have their information. We're also using the FCC last year had an auction for unserved areas across the country, and it was called the Rural Development Opportunity Fund. We have the information from the awards to those because those providers in those areas would not be eligible for this money because they've already received funding. And thirdly, you may be aware, we have done at the Commonwealth level kind of an internet survey, an online map, an online information where people can sign up and provide information about the service they're providing and the speeds that they're receiving their internet at home, at business. And we're going to use that data to help provide more granular information to our initial map. So those are the sources of information we're using to develop an initial map of who has service and at what speed, and therefore who doesn't have service or has lower speed, because we want to focus on the unserved with this first $50 million. So that's kind of how we're going to start. We're going to have that information come back. We're going to, provider and say, no, I've got that area served. Let me show you the information. We've got another provider says that area is unserved. You show it as served. And so we're going to take that information, get confirmation of it, and we're going to modify our map. Then we're going to put out stage 2. Then we're going to put out the long application and RFP with the final map. Here are the eligible areas of unserved. Come at us with project applications, to provide service, meeting the federal requirements. And we'll have an application process. We'll have an application challenge process, which our statute requires. And then we'll go through the determinations, we'll evaluate, and we'll score, and we'll offer awards. And remember, we're looking at the first $50 million as being our source of funds out of the total $300 million. So that's how we're scheduling, that's how we're sequencing it. Next, Sandy. The project selection, the statutes give us guidance on what projects that are in unserved areas where the funds aren't, federal funds or local funds or state funds aren't there, or they're inadequate. Project that reach customers the least economical to serve. And we're focusing the first $50 million on unserved. So in this marketplace, they kind of they match that requirement, right? They're not economical to serve at the end of the county road because there's only 2 houses down the end of that county road, and it's just not good commercial business to reach that. And so I don't think we'll have any problem hitting that point. We have other options that are in the statute: timely completion, most effective service to the greatest number at the lowest cost, and then other project attributes that we're going to put into the application process that we have gleaned. One is common sense. The other is what many other states are doing, and one of which is the adoption strategy that the applicant will take. We can build the infrastructure, but will they come? And so we'll be asking information of those applicants of how are you going to uptake subscribers so that we get the outcome we want, which is broadband service to unserved areas. Next.
While you're changing slides, Representative Bland, did you want to wait till the end or proceed?
Either way, right now is fine.
Co-Chair McDaniel, same question. Wait. Okay, please proceed. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Timelines, we're still working on the details on the timelines. The RFI, the request for information, is going to be next. We're in the process of building the application, but we want the responses to that RFI to inform us, to modify, the work that we're currently doing. We expect the stage 1 application to be released, I would say, in July. I don't see June with the RFI process. But we're trying to be both, I'll say, speedy and deliberate at the same time. We want to be thorough. This is the first time out of the box, and we want to do it as well as we can. We recognize this is new and we don't know everything about it. And so the applicants and the providers will provide information that will help that. But at the same time, we know in looking at the maps, there's plenty of opportunity out there. There's plenty of unserved areas that could use this infrastructure, the government subsidizing the deployment of capital assets here so that this ongoing operation services can be provided to those unserved areas. So we're very excited about this. The governor has committed in briefings with legislative leadership that we'll have a a frequent updates and progress reports on the projects. That goes also for the water and wastewater projects. We want to keep everybody informed and up to date. The federal government with this money says that the funds have to be obligated by December 31 of 2024, and the expenditures must be completed by December 31 of 2026. So there are rules about that. We'll meet those rules, and but wanted to give you all a sense of, these are capital projects, and they take time in order to design and implement. And I think the federal government has recognized that, with their timelines with their deadlines on the ends of the use of this process of these funds. What's left to do? We're going to developing some emergency regulations. I would say that primarily do the following: that comply with the new federal guidance that differs with Kentucky's statute. A few of those. The statutes that you all wrote in 2020 and modified in 21 are well done. They don't leave a whole lot of need for further rulemaking. We're developing the application. That's really the crux of our work right now. And we'll finalize our initial map that we'll put out after the RFI, and we're going to complete our application development and use the RFI as further inputs to the considerations that we've been giving in that development right now. I think we're at the end.
Thank you very much. And Representative Blanton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mainly just a point of pointing out that this is not part of Kentucky Wired. This is, for clarification, finally got the word I was looking for, that this is not Kentucky Wired project. This is the last mile of actually reaching people's residents to get broadband to them. I know I've received a couple emails from some of my constituents, as I've got one of those districts that I have certain areas that has good broadband service, and I have some areas that has no broadband service. So this is to reach out to those areas of need and that final mile of getting it to their residences. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Blanton. That's exactly right. This is last mile, fiber to the premise. Households and businesses, are the ultimate beneficiaries, of this program. So you're very correct. The Kentucky Wired Network is referred to as a middle mile network. I will say that a number of states have made available these funds for a little bit of middle mile if it's necessary to get to the last mile. And so we're not throwing that out, but you're exactly right. This has nothing to do with Kentucky Wired. This is getting internet services to homes and businesses who do not have it or whose speed is too low.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Co-Chair McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, now my understanding, though, is there is a committee for the planning of the deployment of this. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the Kentucky Wired has a seat on that committee. Is that accurate?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a subject matter expert who is an employee of Kentucky Wired. Because he's one of the people that I know in state government who used to work for telecommunication companies in implementing broadband infrastructure, and so we have borrowed some of his time simply because of his subject matter expertise.
But those folks will not be able to apply for any portion of this, or there's no plan for Kentucky Wired to execute last mile fiber. Is that correct?
You're correct in both cases. Yes.
So they will not be doing any last mile work.
No, they will not be doing any of that. No, this is. But we wanted to avail ourselves of an individual who really had some expertise.
Now, are we going to allow any private sector folks into that at all, or into that planning group and deployment group, or is it just going to be
no? Kind of to be clean with the procurement process. Any potential applicants, we have to kind of keep at arm's length, and that's one of the purposes for the request for information, is to get an opportunity for them to submit ideas, suggestions that might assist us in the development of the project. But we have to have a level playing field there.
Very good. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, the group that was just referenced, I understand the potential conflict of interest in excluding them from the group. Has that group solicited any information from industry providers or people that are in that field already working before you do the RFI?
No, we have not.
Any particular reason why not?
because we need to do it through a formal process, because I talked with the Finance Administration Cabinet to make sure we did this the right way. And that was an RFI was their recommendation on how to reach out equally, and have all comers offer any ideas.
You mentioned that would be soon forthcoming. What kind of time frame are we looking at on the RFI going out?
That could be as early as late next week, early the week following.
And latest?
2 weeks from now.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Buford?
Thank you. Can you hear me at this time?
Yes.
Yes. My question would be concerning obviously the Kentucky Wired program. And it is, have you been working with any of the ISP local teleco providers to provide recently to discuss broadband rollout and or any of these regulations with them? I've had some correspondence that they are not in the loop and being well informed.
I think some of the questions are around reaching out to internet service providers.
Have you been able to reach out to local providers and receive input? I think Senator Buford had received contact from multiple points that those potential providers and actual providers are not being brought into the loop, which I think follows up on our earlier questions.
Yeah, that is correct. We're going to use the request for information process to do that very thing. So we have purposely kept arm's distance from potential applicants and providers, and going to use that formal RFI process as the way to glean that information. They can provide us any information they want to and suggestions.
When do you expect that you will contact them? The next day or two, or will it be months? I think they are anxious to know what is happening, what the regulations are or will be or have been established to be. And I think it's very important that we cooperate with them.
Understood. The request for information will be out in the next 2 weeks.
Now, request for information, does that mean they have to contact you, or do you know who they are?
We'll do a combination. We'll broadcast, with the information that we know about existing providers, and that's not hard to find. We know both who the private sector providers are. We know who are providers who've received awards from the federal government. We know rural electric co-ops who have received awards from the federal government. We have contacts with the Public Service Commission to assure that all rural electric co-ops who may want to be in the provision of services, which House Bill 320 clearly helps create a path for. So we'll do our best to make sure that that all that is, and in addition, let me say all local governments. Because there's plenty of participation across the country. The city we're sitting in right now is a municipally provided internet provider, and we'll make sure that they're also informed about the RFI.
Thank you. Is there a timetable? Will this happen tomorrow, today? Or should they contact you at this moment in time now?
Anybody is welcome to contact me to make me or Sandy Williams aware that they would be interested in receiving a request for information and a future request for proposals.
And will that information, I think a lot of them would like to know what you have done maybe so far. They are certainly much more talented to the details of this than we as legislators. I know we received this report from you, but we know you're working hard on it and certainly appreciate that. But they probably have specific, extreme technical questions that we would not know what to ask. So is it okay if they call you? Can you up-to-date them right now if they reach out to you?
No, I cannot. We're going to use the request for information process to assure an equal and comprehensive participation by any potential applicant or provider. That is going to be the way we'll structure it, and that way we're assured, of that equity.
And it's okay, I understand. But you or Sandy are not prepared to speak to them right now or share any information about regulations or future regulations of any kind. Is that correct?
That's correct. But I would say, Senator Buford, that we don't anticipate that our emergency regulations will add a whole lot to the statutory structure or the federal program structure that is already in place. What we will what we're going to use their input for is to develop their RFP in a comprehensive and thorough way.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate your hard efforts. But I do know that when we see an emergency regulation coming from the governor's office, we as legislators panic. So that's all I've got to say, and I thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you.
And the chairman for allowing me to comment.
Thank you. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Hicks, Director Williams. I appreciate your time coming today and sharing about this critical issue for the citizens of Kentucky. Understanding that year one of this project, a large portion of it's going to be identifying the unserved and underserved areas, making some estimates about what that cost is going to be. Do you foresee a time in the immediate future where you could report back to us about just how far this $300 million investment will go and what future needs there might be? And I say that in light of the fact that we've got an additional $800 to $900 million of ARP money to appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Tipton. We won't know until we really get project applications, and I've looked at other states to see when they've made awards how many households and businesses are potentially made available against the dollar value, and it really varies widely. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the rurality or the density of the locations. But I have that question in the back of my mind all the time: what will it take to get us all connected here? And I would just say, just recently, earlier in this month, the National Telecommunications Information Agency, NTIA, just released a near $300 million RFP for unserved areas just this past few weeks. And another pot of money, like the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, which I think Kentucky received nearly $150 million in awards. So, and then as the discussions in D.C. occur on the next infrastructure package, I will say that I hear broadband consistently mentioned as a part of that, no matter who's talking about it. So that's a great question for the future, and one we're just going to have to learn on an iterative basis. But I look forward to knowing the answer one day myself.
Mr. Chair, can I have one more brief follow-up, please? This is essentially a public-private partnership because we got public dollars, private dollars. I know a lot of private businesses that have great ideas and great plans, but they don't always follow through. What kind of safeguards are going to be put in place to protect our public dollars, to make sure these projects come to fruition? Are we going to do performance bonds? What kind of safeguards are going to be in place to protect the taxpayers of Kentucky?
Yeah, thank you for your question. No, we're looking into that, about using the construction industry process, as an analogy for how do you guarantee your building is going to be the building that you had paid for. These are also federal dollars, and there are going to be recoupment requirements in there and criteria. We have to result in that internet service that meets a speed level that is operational, or there is the potential for recoupment. I won't call it a penalty, but the prospect of clawing back funds. So one of the things that we'll be reaching out to the Finance Administration Cabinet to understand how they do that when they're constructing building projects. In a manner of speaking, that's not the kind of thing the Infrastructure Authority does routinely with the water and sewer, but there's some similar requirements because those are federal dollars with state match. So appreciate your question. We want performance, and there has to be accountability associated with that, and that's got to be part of our upfront application development process.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hicks, thank you for coming and giving us an explanation of what's going on with this project. And obviously, it's very significant in terms of our interests and making sure this is procured correctly and so forth. Which, to be frank with you, I'm rather concerned on the procurement process the administration is going to be undertaking with this, because the past, I'd say 2 to 3 different contracts I've seen, it's been a debacle, to put it to you lightly. There are three different types of procurement processes. You have requests for information, which you spoke of, which the private sector has been involved in many occasions on the federal level when it comes to architectural engineering services. So when you not include them in the information process, I have to differ with you. They should be. Second of all, in request for proposals, that's a possibility. That's a good avenue, but also request for qualifications. And under the Brooks Act on the federal on the federal level, the engineering and architectural firms use a very good, strong process of going through and looking at the qualifications, and not based on price, and making sure the service are delivered and the coverage is maintained. I would strongly encourage you to look at the private sector, to bring them in the beginning, to have them participate in that, and not just through an RFI, because RFIs can be sort of misconstrued and taken in a different avenue in terms of sucking the marrow out of the bone when it comes to the private sector in order to enhance government competition with the private sector. So I want to make sure that the Kentucky Wire will not, or its subsidiaries, will not be associated or participate in this process. If it is, then we'll have to come back and discuss this further. I want to make sure that Kentucky Wire, any of its subsidiaries, are not going to be included in this process.
Well, I can assure you of that. In terms of, one, your statute precludes the Kentucky Wire from receiving any of these funds.
And its subsidiaries.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure how the statute reads right now. I'll have to check on that. I think it says Kentucky Wired.
Okay, well, people change their name, or companies change their names, and things shift. And there's got to be some, at least some fail-safe, some safeguards to make sure that is not sort of doesn't play out in terms of Kentucky Wire getting into this involvement through a subsidiary or through some other ancillary group that's associated with them. I need to have some assurances that they're not going to be included, because what I'm fearful of is the RFI will be used. Kentucky Wire will come in the back end through some entity or some group, and then they will basically provide a last mile, which basically shuts out the private sector.
Well, I appreciate your input, on the procurement process, and have been through an RFQ process myself in the past on that. We certainly intend for the RFI process to give us information that an RFQ that would be the kind of information you'd want on a qualified applicant. There's certainly going to be elements in there, and your statute requires that in the application process of a lot of information about the applicant itself, their financial capability, their experience. So those things will be followed, and I can assure you we will comply with the statute.
And I appreciate that. And I really appreciate if you look at the weights, if you put into those qualifications, those criterias, that's really weighted more toward the quality service and not price. You need to look at, and you basically go through that process, and you come on the back end and talk with those vendors, those providers, and then you basically beat them up when it comes to price and get them down to a point that's more digestible. I would really strongly encourage you to look at quality-based selection in order to procure this in a very prudent manner.
Thank you for your
Thank
input.
you.
Very good. Senator Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And John, I think the RFI process, I appreciate starting with the RFI process because it's what you start with. And you can garner information. And in my conversation with entities, providers, and just groups interested in getting broadband, they're aware that this process is coming. So, I appreciate that. And I think it's the way you do it. Like you stated earlier, it's transparent, it's for accountability, it's to arm's length any potential appearance of impropriety. I appreciate that sitting here today and hearing that. So I've got a comfort level at this stage, and this is something that we're going to continue to monitor. We're going to be advised of what's going on, and I think that you will get the information that you need from the providers, public and private sectors, and municipalities. My conversations with these people, they already know it's coming. So, I appreciate that. And I just, what I guess my concern would be how much information are we going to get to forecast to avoid duplicity and make efficient use of the monies that are coming and the services that are being provided. I'm like Chairman Blanton, I live in a place where it's a mixed bag. It's sometimes all or none, and with not a prospect of that none being accommodated in even perhaps with this infusion. So that would be my concern, not with the process or not the way you all are handling it. I think that is the way to go, and it's a good start, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Different subject, but somewhat related, and I apologize in advance if you've already given this information out in a different committee already this morning. But as we left session this time, much talk about another round of ARPA funding, $2.8 billion or whatever the number may be. But what's the latest information that you're hearing? Is that other round, is it coming soon? Have you heard any information you can give us on that?
Sure.
Coming from the feds.
Yeah, thanks, Senator West. Yeah, the award to Kentucky for the State Fiscal Recovery Fund is $2,183,000,000. They have released 50% of that to Kentucky. Most states got 50%. A handful of states got 100% based on their unemployment rate. So we've got half of that in hand. That is strikingly similar to the amount of appropriations the General Assembly has already made from the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. So in essence, the second half, the other 50%, is roughly equivalent to the amount yet to be appropriated by the General Assembly for all the different purposes that the State Fiscal Recovery Fund can be used.
So I was a little confused from our earlier meeting in government contracts this morning, government oversight. So that's basically it. That's the ARPA funds that we've expected, and that's it.
Correct.
So there's nothing you've heard about an additional round after that?
No, we have not.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Beckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting back to broadband, and this kind of is a follow-up to Representative Fleming. Open Fiber is in some way, well, it was Open Fiber. They just changed their name to Excelicon, I think. Excelicom is some way connected to Kentucky Wired. And I just wanted to make sure that they would not be able to bid on the project as well. Can you give me that assurance?
I will yield to my counsel on that one because I know what the statute says. It says that funds may not be awarded to Kentucky Wired.
Well, they've tried very hard to make it appear
and that's going to be the case.
Yeah, but Kentucky Wired made it very hard, or has tried very hard to make it appear that they don't have any connection with Open Fiber, and I think they still do have a connection. So I'd really appreciate your input on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And then I'm going to close up with just a few things, unless you've got something else major left.
No, sir.
All right, thank you. One, understanding that this type of project has not been undertaken in Kentucky previously. There is a learning curve, and I appreciate that, and I know you're putting in hard work, okay? Can you provide me within the next 10 to 14 days a timeline, like a project completion date for each of the sub-projects that get us to actual deployment? Basically an outline and as much detail as you can give and as much expected completion date for each of those units as best you can estimate at this time. Not so that later on I can go, gotcha, but so that we have some idea to answer questions with, and we know when to ask you to come back or ask for reports and say, where are we? Where are you? Are we making progress? Has something changed? Is there something that we can do? So that we can collaboratively move this effort along. Is that doable?
What I'll commit to you, Mr. Chairman, is one of the things, the benefit of not being the first to do something, is to go and look at all those who've done it before us. There have been some states who've been doing this for years. We've paid really close attention to their timelines. How long do they leave the application open? How long does it take to the challenge process? So maybe not within the next 10 to 14 days, but we're not too far away from that timeline to be able to give you, because in essence, that is going to be a key element of our application process are those timelines. But very near that timeline. I hope I could be able to give you a good sketch that really lines out, and I will say this, we're learning from our peers when I say that. The RFI responses may inform that further about that, because there have been some other comments about the existing labor market and supply issues that may make this current time we're sitting in a little differently than our comparisons we have with other states.
Whatever you give me is going to be a reflexive product. It's going to change over time, and you and I understand that as quickly as you can, and I can't overstate the importance to me of receiving that so we can follow along and work with you on it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
All right. Secondly, a little bit of a PSA, if we could, mapping. There is a website that local government officials, city, county, anybody else, school systems, anybody else could access and encourage all the people that they know to get on that mapping website and do that. What is that website?
I do not have that in my pocket.
Mr. Hicks.
But I filled it out at home. So I've done it, but
Ms. Williams, do you have internet access there? Or do you know that website offhand? If you can find it, I'd like for somebody to be able to announce it before I can try to pull it up, but announce it before we leave. And the reason being is that the better the mapping we have, the better this project is going to be, because, as you mentioned, it's the last mile. The way House Bill 320 was set up is that it actually tries to get to the last of the last miles, that which no other market forces are going to make it happen. But we're going to help those that are not going to be helped in the next 10, 20 years, and then work our way back where market forces will come into play. I'd also like to note this. You mentioned at the very front end of your presentation, developing a program for $50 million. I would take issue with that. Develop a program for $300 million, which is what was appropriated. And you can say, well, the payment schedule. Okay, well, I'll add this challenge. Give me a timeline, get the completion dates met, reflexive process, make it work with us. If it turns out that in August, September, October, like you are ready to go, we've exceeded all expectations and are ready to go, then it would be extraordinarily easy, I would think, to have a special session called on a very narrow call for an appropriation bill to make sure that that money is flowing more quickly than first anticipated, at least up to the $300 million mark.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would agree that we're forming this project to be at least the $250 million of underserved and unserved, and just wanted to make a kind of an emphasis of the unserved, kind of being the first 50. But you're right. The application process we're going to develop is going to morph into the process we will have on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. So when you're ready for more money and the process has been developed, say so in advance so we can draft the bill, do a special call to get it done and move on. No comment requested. Just let's let you know that.
I understand.
All right. And I think that's all I have. I really appreciate you. I see no other questions from members. I really appreciate the both of you coming up and presenting this morning as well as this afternoon, and I encourage you to stay in contact with us. I will be in contact with you as well as staff will be. We're working on timeline and then how often we try to get reports. I don't want to bog you down with reports, but I want to make sure we're ready when you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Sunrise. Next issue up with Sunrise Children's Services, scope and history of services. I think that we have Dale Suttles, president of Sunrise, Andy Weeks, board chair of Sunrise, and John Scheller, attorney for Sunrise, participating remotely. Is everyone, each of the three of you there?
Yes, sir, Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Will each of you raise your right hands, please? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
I've got one I do left off.
I do.
Very good. Thank you. We have about 25 minutes or less, and I'm assuming that there will be some questions, but I've asked you to present On Sunrise Children's Services, the scope and history of services, it's been in the news. It's been in the news. So we've got an issue coming up by the end of June, whether this particular entity continues to offer services. My interest in the issue first for today is this. As a matter of appropriations and revenue, we have a service provider to children and adults in Kentucky by contract with Kentucky to render services for foster care and adoption placement. As I understand, a fairly large organization, private organization in that endeavor, and there is some possibility that that contract would not be renewed at the end of June. That would leave a hole in our ability to render services in those contexts, as well as it concerns me of if there is a hole for services, then there may be additional appropriations we have to come up with in order to accommodate those services and that lack provided by this particular entity. So if you'll give me an idea about the scope and history of services for Sunrise and help us understand the order of magnitude of impact potential, both real world personal terms as well as financial terms, if the contract is not renewed by the end of June. Please proceed.
Well, so good afternoon, Chairman Petrie and the committee. Thank you for having us on today and just listen to some of our concerns. I'll go through some of the history real quick. I think it's important for you to know that Sunrise Children's Services, or what was called the Old Baptist Homes for Children, has been around since 1869. Has a long history of child welfare within the Commonwealth. This ministry started at Walnut Street Baptist Church in Louisville as to care for orphans after the Civil War. It simply evolved over time, and in 1914 it was official and developed a covenant relationship with the Kentucky Baptist Convention, who then started appointing the institution's board of trustees. And to fast forward, in 1970s, the Commonwealth of Kentucky came to what was still called Baptist Homes for Children and said, we would like to partner with you. We have folks, we have children, we have families that we need help. Will you partner and enter into a contract? And it was discussed. I wasn't around then, but it was discussed. And we have been partners for over 40 years and moving forward. We have not missed a day of caring for kids since 1869. So consider that committee over 152 years of serving some of Kentucky's most vulnerable children. And thought it would be neat for you to see some of the first buildings we had, the Louisville Baptist Orphans Home here. And again, things have changed over the years, but we were truly dealing with the orphans then. Back in the day, this is some of the property of the old Glendale property. I know some of you guys know Glendale outside of Elizabethtown. This was a property that housed many children over many years. As a matter of fact, there is a train track that runs parallel to the property in the city of Glendale there, and they used to call that the Orphan Train when kids would be dropped off and at the large farm there and would live there and go to school there and so on. Obviously, we work like any provider with a cabinet. Children that are wards of the state, abused and neglected children. Folks, Sunrise works with some of the toughest situations that you can imagine, atrocities that you and I could never imagine. We see that here at Sunrise Children's Services. Many of the kids are removed by their homes through the Child Protective Services and placed in the Department of Community-Based Services, and that's who we partner with. What Sunrise offers today is therapeutic foster care. Obviously, it is foster care with that therapeutic twist. Again, children that have experienced many traumas. We need therapy, we need case management, and we need the foster homes. We do residential treatment. We currently have 4 We have 3 residential treatment centers across Kentucky located in strategic areas to serve kids, even from rural areas. We have a psychiatric residential treatment facility in Danville that treats children who have failed one mental hospital visit, and they come to Sunrise to get some of the therapies that they need. You walk through that facility, you see children. If you would hear their stories, you wouldn't believe how you see them today. It's just, the staff does remarkable work. Family Services is our programming that surrounds families that are vulnerable, that could fall apart at any minute. And so we give them case management and therapies for those problems. Foster to Adopt. Think about this. Sunrise is pretty close to a milestone, over 600 adoptions. And if those 600 kids were still in the foster care program, it would be an immense expense to the state. And so we've always been about adoption. That's where our heart has been. If you look at this map, you can see a history, or you can see the placements of our programs. You see foster care, you see independent living. I did not talk about independent living. This is a program we have for children that are aging out of the system. And then what we do is combine that with something called Venture On, which is a program that has won national awards. And basically what we do there is provide apartments, we provide case management, we tie these young people to colleges, to trade schools, and we help them on what we call their path of life. And this is something we started back in 2012, 2013, when this was becoming a hot topic. And so we're very proud of that. And you can also see where we have residential girls in one of our Elizabethtown program, and then residential boys in our other programs. As you can see today, the clients that we are serving, and you can go ahead and look over the totals there. You move on. The last 2 years, we have averaged about 50 adoptions, total adoptions nearing 600. Again, we're very proud of that. We're also proud of the accreditation we have. We've been Gold Seal accredited by the Joint Commission since 2007, with our last survey being in 2020, which resulted in that Gold Seal accreditation till the year 2023. I would ask Andy Weeks now to talk a little bit about our board.
Thank you, Dale. Board of Directors is made up of 24 members. The members of the board are nominated by the president of Sunrise, but those are submitted to the Kentucky Baptist Convention, who then makes the final selection of the board of director. And the executive director of the KBC is an ex officio member, so serves as a member of the board. Each board member serves a 4-year term and then is eligible for a second 4-year term on the board of directors. And the board of directors provides oversight to multiple aspects of the program. One of the primary things is ensuring that the philosophy of the program is maintained going forward. We work with the staff of Sunrise, especially with the president, to ensure that they adopt objectives and have a strategy that's aligned with those philosophies. We review the programs to ensure that they are operating effectively and are fulfilling the mission of the organization. We also are involved in improving staffing plans for Sunrise, for Sunrise, as well as the president, the position of the president. We also have oversight over facilities for for Sunrise as that goes forward, and then finally exercise the fiduciary responsibility over the financing of Sunrise Children's Services, and looking at the intake of funds, the outflow of funds, both from the contracts that Sunrise has, as well as the donations and that help offset some of the costs of services that are provided.
Sunrise is often asked by entities in rural areas to establish programming. What you see in front of you now is a building across from the courthouse in Harlan, Kentucky. when you talk about broadband, and we know these folks in Eastern Kentucky have been waiting for that for a long time, that will help us reach folks that need critical help. Again, there are folks in Eastern Kentucky that need help, and there's just not enough services for them. So we will be opening up a family services office there, again, directly across from the courthouse. We'll be working with some of the judges, some of the attorneys there. As families need help, it will be very convenient to come right across the street, and we will start working and doing counseling with those programs, with those individuals. One of the neat things about this building upstairs, there are 8 apartments that we're going to renovate, and we're going to use that for independent living and venture on. We're going to find young adults from the area that need a hand out, and we're going to work with them, give them a place to lay their head, and tie them to the community college and some other workforce development programs, and really start moving them through that process of a path of life for them, drastically needed in Eastern Kentucky. The Solid Rock Children's Ranch is something that's kind of in the planning phases. It is a trust of a working farm that has been given to us, and the vision of this person is to develop something like has been developed in Hersey, Pennsylvania, that is a sort of a village concept, hard to place teen foster kids, which is an enormous problem here in the Commonwealth, would have a place to live in sort of a group setting. There would be an overseer there in every one of those homes. There would be 3 homes on this property. There would be animals and equine therapy and so on. And again, taking hard to place teens and maybe giving them a hand up. We don't have all of the considerations ready for this program yet. Obviously, we established this farm in 2016. We're just kind of waiting to see what comes down the pike and see what monies would be available to help us get this going. This is the Sanders Center on the Danville campus. And again, this is an aging out. We're going to use this and partner with Harrodsburg Campbellsville University. We could house up to 16 children in this facility, or young adults, actually. It could be 17, 18, 19. Again, tying them to opportunities at Campbellsville University. That particular campus has 1-year, 2-year degrees. You can get a 4-year degree, but you can do HVAC, you can learn to cut hair, a welding program, and so on. Finding a path of life for these late teenagers that simply need that hand to move forward. And again, finally, this is our Mount Washington residential program directly across the street. Is our program that houses boys that have been sexually abused. It's one of the only programs in the state. They come to us because they potentially are showing signs of acting out. These are boys that have experienced trauma many, many, many times over. It's a neat program that we conduct here. This is actually our corporate center, and out of this corporate center, we would run a family services office that would partner with families here in the Mount Washington area, Bardstown area that need those counseling services. You know, why are we different? There's a lot of people out there, a lot of providers doing a lot of great work. Sunrise has always been a faith-based organization. We love God, we love people. We don't apologize for that. Sometimes folks don't completely understand that, but we have always looked to take care of the least of these, some of the most hurting, vulnerable children and families. We do that through therapeutic modalities. We are a behavioral health service organization. We received that license in the latter part of 2013, and we will use that license to continue the good work for counseling as we move forward. One of the critical areas here in Kentucky, and I'd have to go back to some of the Michelle P. Waiver, a lot of things that are being experienced in those programs are being experienced here at Sunrise. But the need for qualified therapists to work with an ever increasing population of folks that need help certainly is a tremendous need here in the Commonwealth. And those therapists do work under our behavioral health BHSO license. So I'd like to turn it over to our counsel, John Scheller, to do a synopsis of some of the legal issues we've been facing and what brings us to this meeting today.
Thank you, Dale, and thank the committee for your attention today. To clarify, Sunrise has had a contract with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services for almost 50 years now. It has contracted with the Cabinet through both Democratic and Republican administrations during that entire time, with the exception of the most recent administration. Sunrise's contracts run from July 1st to June 30th of any given year. The most recent contract was the 2019 to 2020 contract. And so we began, which was of course the last year under the Bevin administration. We began efforts to renew that contract for the following year, the 2020-21 year, in the spring of 2020 with the new Secretary of the Cabinet, which is Secretary Friedlander. And we were unsuccessful in getting that contract for 2021. So Sunrise has technically been operating now without a contract for nearly a year. The Cabinet has continued to work with Sunrise, has continued to reimburse Sunrise for its services over the last 11 months. But what changed is that in March of this year, the Cabinet advised us overtly that the Cabinet would discontinue any relationship with Sunrise, discontinue the referrals of the children altogether beginning in July 1 of 2021, unless the contract was signed. We were never told why during the entire time that we were dealing with this issue from spring of 2020 until this past spring. We had multiple efforts to communicate with the Cabinet about the situation. And frankly, we were never able to get a straight answer as to why we couldn't contract with this administration when we'd successfully contracted with all the prior administrations, both Democratic and Republican. There is ongoing litigation that has been that Sunrise has been involved in with the ACLU since 2020, over 21 years now. But that wouldn't have prevented a new contract. So we were sort of in the dark and perplexed about why the Cabinet was so adamant about the situation. We ultimately learned the reason, which was that they wanted Sunrise to sign the exact same contract that every other provider signs. That contract, though, does not have to be uniform, does not have to be identical. Sunrise has always found a way to partner with the Commonwealth by tweaking a few words in the contract.
Mr. Scheller, I just want to let you know, I have less than 5 minutes. I have one question to ask you. If you will try to wrap it up as quickly as you can, though.
Okay. We are being asked to comply with a regulation that was actually repealed in November of 2019. We don't know why the Commonwealth keeps hanging their hat on that. It's a remnant of the Obama administration that was repealed in the Trump administration, and the Biden administration has not reimpose that. So there's no federal mandate that would require the Commonwealth to treat Sunrise the way it has. And we're simply asking that Sunrise's First Amendment rights be respected going forward as a matter of both federal law and state law, and of course the supreme law of the First Amendment. The General Assembly has spoken on this a number of times. We understand that the General Assembly is supportive of the First Amendment rights. 5 constitutional officers in the state agree with us, have beseeched Governor Beshear to change his mind, so far without success. And as a last resort, of course, we may be forced to go to court to protect Sunrise's First Amendment rights. But we hope that the administration will have a change of heart and deal with Sunrise without the courts forcing it to do so. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Mr. Weeks and Mr. Suttles are as well.
I appreciate it very much. I'm just going to ask you if you've got these numbers to supply them, answer the question today, and if not, get the numbers to this committee as quickly as you can. The contracted services with the Commonwealth of Kentucky, do you know about how much is paid by the Commonwealth annually to Sunrise Children's Services?
Yes, and that's I can get you a more defined answer. I apologize, our accounting folks. One of our folks is in the hospital today, and another had a emergency in Dallas, Texas. But I can tell you that looking at what I've got in front of me so far this year, our revenues from the cabinet is about $16 million.
16 million?
16 million, yes.
All right,
we're a large organization.
Yes, and the second part of that question is, can you tell me how much Sunrise Children's Services is expending to deliver those services? It could be 16 million, less than 16 million, or more than 16 million.
Our total expenses so far this year is 22 million. 228. Now we have, just like the young lady that addressed with the Michelle P. waiver, we've had a lot of overtime because we've had to cover a lot of hours through overtime simply because it's hard to find folks to work.
And from where does the $6 million net negative come?
We have always raised our shortfall. There's always been a shortfall. We get reimbursements from the Kentucky Baptist Convention of about 1.2 million, and then we do our best to raise the rest, either through programming or through private funders.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. All right, and have you been operating at that type of deficit and raising money for just 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years? It's just the way that it works.
It's the kind of the way it works. Again, our children are given a level of care when they come in. You're paid upon that level. That level goes down drastically, but you have to continue to have the same level of staffing.
All right, thank you very much. I know I have 2 more people who have questions, but I have another meeting at 3 o'clock, so we're going to close very quickly. Mr. Suttles, Mr. Weeks, Mr. Scheller, thank you very much for the presentation today. And then I'm going to go back real quick on the prior subject matter on broadband. The Internet Speed Test website, this is how the executive branch will measure speed requirements throughout the state and do that mapping so they can see where the need actually is. educationcabinet.ky.gov. There's a lot of backslashes at that point, but I think you'll find it. Initiative pages, KBI. I encourage anybody in local government, school systems, anything else to go to that website and do it. The better the mapping we have, the more efficiently we'll use our state dollars that are being appropriated for the broadband and get to the last of the last miles. With that being said, it is now 3 o'clock. We're adjourned.